Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a central contradiction, something right at the heart of America's founding. How a nation conceived in liberty was also built on the institution of slavery. And to really get a feel for just how deep this contradiction runs, let's start with this quote from the abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. For him, the Constitution wasn't this sacred document of freedom. No, he saw it as a profound moral failure because of the way it compromised on and even protected slavery.
So this really brings us to the big question we're going to explore. How on earth did the United States, a nation founded on these incredible ideals of liberty, square that with the brutal reality of human bondage for millions of people living there?
Okay, so let's start by just digging right into this fundamental conflict. We're going to look at the paradox between what America said it was about, freedom, and what it actually did, right from the very beginning. Right from the get-go, the nation's birth was marked by this deep, bitter irony. The founding documents are filled with language about liberty and equality, but in practice, the country was building a racial caste system at the exact same time, where freedom was denied to millions simply because of their African heritage. Alright, next up, we're going to see how this wasn't just some philosophical problem. No, this contradiction was deliberately and systematically stitched right into the nation's legal and political fabric. So picture this, it's 1787, the Constitutional Convention, and this whole contradiction just comes to a boil. The founders had to decide how to count the millions of enslaved people in the country, and their solution was this critical and, deeply cynical compromise. And what's so telling when you look at this is that this whole debate wasn't really about morality, it was all about power. You had the North wanting more tax money from the South, and the South wanting way more political muscle in Congress. Both sides were arguing for whatever would benefit them the most. And the result of this was huge. The 3/5 compromise literally translated human beings held as property directly into massive political influence. It's a perfect example of how the founders chose national unity over morality, and it had real consequences. This shaped federal laws for decades and even tipped presidential elections. Thomas Jefferson's victory in 1800, that was pretty much secured by the extra electoral votes the South got from its enslaved population. So, with that political power in place, let's look at the massive, brutal economy it supported. An economy built on the buying, selling, and forced labor of human beings. The sheer scale of this human economy is just staggering. As the demand for cotton absolutely exploded in the 19th century, so did the demand for slave labor. By the time the Civil War kicked off, the enslaved population in the South had hit 4 million. 4 million people. And this ad right here, this just perfectly captures the complete dehumanization at the heart of the slave economy. This wasn't some rare, shocking thing. This was just business as usual. Human beings, choice Gold Coast slaves, are listed for sale right alongside rum and spices, as if they were just another product on a shelf. The domestic slave trade was the engine that fed the Cotton Kingdom, and it was horrifically brutal. We're talking about over 1 million people sold down the river, often marched for hundreds of miles chained together in groups called coffles. Families were constantly and casually torn apart. Some plantations even became known as breeding farms, where enslaved women were subjected to systematic rape to produce more children to be sold for profit. But, and this is so important to remember, this brutal system did not go unchallenged. Even in the face of all this dehumanization, the human spirit fought back. Resistance was a constant in all kinds of different ways through the entire history of American slavery. Right from the very beginning, you see these organized violent revolts cropping up. These weren't just isolated incidents, they were part of a continuous, desperate struggle for liberation. You see everything from plots to burn entire cities to thousands of people fleeing to join the British during the Revolutionary War. But resistance wasn't always a huge, open revolt. It often took more hidden and subtle forms. And one of the forms most feared by enslavers was the use of poison. This was a practice with deep cultural roots in West Africa, often carried out by women who used their knowledge of herbs and roots to covertly fight back. And what's really fascinating here is how modern scholarship encourages us to see these acts differently. Instead of just labeling it murder, some historians argue it should be understood as a form of self-defense or even justice. They see it as an application of African cultural norms or protocol against an oppressive system that offered absolutely no legal path to safety or freedom. But, the history of slavery is not a simple black and white narrative. The system it created produced really uncomfortable and complex social dynamics that challenge our modern assumptions about race and power. So let's look at a part of this history that really complicates that picture of race and power during this period. The historical record shows that thousands of free people of color owned slaves. And this fact has created a difficult, intense debate among historians. Were they primarily benevolent actors, buying family members out of bondage to protect them? Or were some of them acting as capitalists, exploiting enslaved labor for their own profit, just like white slaveholders? The truth is deeply complex, and likely varied from person to person, and it really reminds us that this system forced people into impossible moral positions. So why does all this history matter today? Well, the answer is simple. Because the end of slavery in 1865 was not the end of the systems it created. Think about this for a second. For 246 years, that's far longer than the United States has existed without it, slavery was a foundational legal part of American society. An institution that deeply embedded itself into the nation's economy, culture, and laws. Well, that wasn't just going to disappear overnight. And it didn't. Immediately after abolition, new legal and economic systems were created to control black labor. Convict leasing, for example, allowed states to arrest black men for minor crimes and then lease them out for brutal, unpaid work. Sharecropping often trapped families in inescapable cycles of debt. These systems created a new form of involuntary servitude that persisted for decades. Ultimately, you can't fully understand America today without understanding this history. It's often called the nation's original sin, precisely because there is a direct line connecting the 246 years of slavery and its aftermath to many of the deep-rooted inequalities that persist in our society. And this leaves us with a final, crucial question to consider. What parts of this long shadow do we still live under? And what does it mean to truly reckon with this history and its enduring legacy?